Welcome to the Swine Health Black Belt Podcast, the latest swine health research digested for you. My name is Dr. Clayton Johnson, and I'm your host for today's episode. Today's episode is a special second edition of our interview with Dr. Dustin Boler of Carthage Innovative Swine Solutions. Dr. Boler has prepped us in part one on what it takes to establish a solid swine research program for your team, and we're going to go into a little more detail on that today. Now, I would encourage you, if you have not listened to part one of our interview with Dr. Boler, go ahead and hit pause on this episode and go back to last week's episode. Go check out our release from last Friday with Dr. Dustin Boler. Listen to part one first, and then you'll find it smoothly transitions here into our deep dive into running a research program in a commercial swine production system. Without further ado, let's dive into it with Dr. Dustin Boler.
Who's your customer, Dustin? Who are you doing research for?
Yeah, so our research falls into largely three buckets for the most part. Most of our research is nutrition related. And so as I mentioned, we have a team of nutritionists within the Carthage system. We work very, very closely to them. That could be manipulation of nutrients, lysine titration studies as an example. It could be such that we have a sponsor that has feed additives that they want to test their compound within a certain scenario. So a majority of our research is nutrition based. The second largest bucket then would be health. And so keeping pigs healthy, raising pigs humanely, obviously is the primary objective of everyone in the swine industry. And so we interact with pharmaceutical companies. We interact with, again, if you've got a swine health group, we conduct research on their behalf as well. And then the last is kind of everything else. And so we might do space allocation or a feed type study or perhaps a new technology. And so really anything that you can think of within reason that involves whether it's sow research, whether it's wean to finish research, regardless of what that might be, we try to do our best to at least spend some effort in that demographic.
I know a lot of producers have a research barn, most times wean to finish, I think. What really is unique about the research assets or the research program that you oversee? What differentiates what you can do for those customers relative to anybody else who happens to have a research barn?
Yep, absolutely. So field trials are absolutely imperative. They're very valuable. They give you a peek into the system, usually within your system. And so what's unique about Carthage or what's unique about any research, formal research program is the ability to control variation. And the ability to make a formal comparison. And so if you think about in a field trial, and we've got a feed additive as an example that we're going to try, and we only have one feed system, well, all of the pigs in that barn are going to be fed that feed compound, and then we're going to compare those data relative to historical norms. And that's a great peek. It's a great snapshot of how that molecule or that feed additive may respond. But there's a lot of other things that contribute to variability. It could be seasonality, it could be genetics, it could be water quality, it could be general health of the pigs. There's lots of other confounding factors that may contribute either to a response or a lack of response. So when you get into a formal research scenario, we can control variability and we can make a formal comparison between the feed additive or the not, the actual test subject, if you will, and really get a scientific answer to those comparisons, where in a field study scenario, it's more of an implied response.
So you've got a customer, presumably in some cases, somebody with something that they want to test, right? A product or a strategy that they want to test out. You do the work for them, unbiased and objective. You get the measurements. What happens then? Who takes that information and makes decisions with it? And then how does that information get communicated?
Yep. So the normal process of a research project is kind of in 4 stages. And so most is the planning, and actually the best portion of the best way to result in a successful research project is a lot of planning on the beginning. And so a lot of times you might hear P to the 5th. And if you know what P to the 5th, that's proper planning prevents poor performance. And so we'll sit down before we ever run a study, and we'll really try to define the objective of that study as clearly as we possibly can. Because if we get the objective defined very clearly, that helps us design the research experiment so that we're truly testing that objective. We've got all of our data. And then to your question, what happens to that is that it comes back, and as I said, our team has been growing, and we've just recently added a data analysis team. That data analysis team takes all of those data and goes through a data cleaning process. And so we're human, mistakes are made, outliers, recording errors, all those kinds of things. And so the first thing that the data team will do is go through and try to find any mistakes or omissions or outliers. Maybe we've got a super prolific sow in there that her data are completely accurate, but she's a rock star. So maybe you don't want her in your data set. We'll clean through those. And then we actually have a statistician on the team that will actually analyze those data, summarize them from a statistical standpoint. Then we share those data with a sponsor and say, okay, this is what we think, and in our scientific expert opinions, these are our conclusions for the data based on the trial that we just executed. And from there, it's up to the sponsor. They own the data, they own the results that we have provided them, and what they choose to do with them is certainly up to them.
And talk a little bit about the confidentiality, Dustin, because I know that's always a surprise for some of your customers. They may chat with me at an industry meeting and say, hey, what do you think of that trial that Dustin and his team are doing? And my response is always, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? They're always very surprised by that, but talk about why that's important and how you guys try to maintain that confidentiality, certainly being a part of the Carthage system, even, from the parts that aren't Carthage Innovative Swine Solutions.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great point. Confidentiality is absolutely imperative for a lot of reasons. One, we fully appreciate that if a sponsor is coming to us with a trial, they are trying to provide themselves a competitive advantage. I get that, and that makes a lot of sense. But a lot of the confidentiality, and the reason that confidentiality is so important, goes back to one of your previous questions, is what happens if we run a research project that actually has a negative impact on productivity? And so the confidentiality gives a sponsor a level of confidence and hopefully a level of comfort that they can try something. If they've got a molecule that they know is right on the cusp, but maybe they don't have it dialed in exactly right, that they can run a research project risk-free essentially and say, it worked, we're ready for the big time, or we're not quite there yet, we need to go back and tweak that project. And they can do that without any kind of negative stigma that might creep out into the industry. And if somebody has a bad experience with a product before it ever gets started, it can be very difficult for them to get that product, to get a second opportunity, right? You never get the chance to make second chance to make a first impression. And so it gives those sponsors an opportunity to test some things risk-free that they may not have the opportunity to do if it's in a field trial.
Very good. What's the hardest part about running a research program, Dustin?
What is this? How does the saying go? Pigs are easy, people are difficult. And so it's one of those things that it takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of coordination, it takes a lot of competing objectives. And so it goes back to what we discussed just a second ago, that the planning portion and getting that objective crystal clear at the very beginning from running a research project is important, because if you don't do that piece, obviously a veterinarian may have one objective with a research trial, a nutritionist may have a different objective with that trial. If we're sending those pigs to a packer, they may have a different objective with those trials. And if we're trying to meet everybody's expectations at once, it's likely that we don't meet any. And so good, clear communication, establishing that objective on the front, really determining what your outcome is and what that outcome looks like is, in my opinion, the most difficult piece of running a research trial.
Thank you, Dr. Boler, for your expertise and sharing with us on what it takes to run a commercial swine production research program. I want to thank you for coming on to the show for this two-part series on running a research program. And to our audience, thank you for listening to the Swine Health Black Belt podcast. If you have not visited us at our website, please check us out at swinehealthblackbelt.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so that you won't miss out on our next episode, soon to come next week. Thanks, everybody, and please have a great rest of your week.
Hey, everyone. We're always searching for the latest and greatest research to share each week.
If you have a swine health-related research trial and would like to come on the show to talk about it with me and share it with our audience, feel free to send an email to healthblackbelt@swineit.com, and we would love to take a look at your research.